Hey guys, in this video, I'm going to be talking about the best specs that are going to take you from level 60 to 70 in TBC. And depending on what gear you have, what you're looking to do in TBC, whether it be dungeons, world PvP, solo elites, or just level up to 70, just all through quests, depending on what you're looking to do, there's going to be a different spec that might be best. And, let's just get right into it. So the first spec I'm going to talk about is going to be combat. Pretty standard leveling spec. Everybody knows combat. Everybody knows what to expect. Now, when it comes to combat, you might be wondering what's better, maces, swords, or fist weapons. Maces actually got a little bit better in TBC. You now have increases the damage dealt by your critical strikes by 1% per point of mace spec. So get a little more damage from that, making maces better than they were in classic. And then also you've got, sword and fist spec remains unchanged. So all in all, it really doesn't matter what you use. You want to use the best available weapon. But if you had to choose, swords and maces are going to be better than fist weapons. And the reason is, it might seem weird, but the mace stun is actually nice while leveling and is going to give you increased damage, because while the target is stunned, they can't dodge, parry, block, anything like that. And it also reduces the damage you take. And if you ever get into any world PvP, I would feel a lot safer being maces than fists. So I would prefer maces to fists, but swords are going to be your fastest to level. But again, all three are close together, and just play whatever weapon you have available to you that is slow in the main hand, that does decent weapon damage. Now, moving past that, it's a pretty standard build. Not too much going on here. If you've seen the classic tree, there's not going to be really much that is new. The only stuff that is really going to be new that you actually use are surprise attacks and combat potency, which are just going to passively increase your damage, and you're going to notice combat potency giving you spikes of energy, so that's fun. But yeah, combat swords, it's just, doesn't matter what gear you have, it's going to be solid. Doesn't matter if you get pulled out of stealth or no matter what is happening, combat is always a great leveling spec because of Blade Flurry. The weaknesses are going to be basically just PvP. The spec is good at everything but PvP. So if you're looking to PvP while leveling, this spec is not going to be the best. Besides that, it's a great option. Moving past that, combat daggers. I'm just going to touch on combat daggers for a moment. The spec changes a little bit. Oh, and real quick, let me just show you how you would do the talents at level 60, as you're not going to have the build fully complete right out the gates. So at level 60, this is what the spec is going to look like. You've, again, got flexibility. You can put lightning reflexes over improved gouge. There's lots of little things you can tweak. You can go for aggression over endurance if you want, but I think endurance is helpful, especially when you're pulling multiple enemies with Blade Flurry. But this is what I would have my level 60 build look like, and I would go into Relentless Strikes. I would go into Lethality. I would put points into aggression and finish out the build with a point in vitality. So that's how my spec would look. And again, you can put stuff into improved kick, improved sprint if you want to be a little stronger in PvP. Now, when it comes to daggers, you're going to have just ever so slightly different build. You're going to want to put 5 points in opportunity. Again, this is what my spec would look like at 60. I would put 1 point in Relentless Strikes, then 5 points in opportunity, 4 in lethality, and that would be the build. And I wouldn't really recommend playing combat daggers unless you're going to do dungeons. There's better dagger builds for leveling than combat daggers. And if you do want to play combat, I would recommend picking up a main hand that's going to be slower and do more damage with your Sinister Strikes, rather than using a dagger in playing combat. So I really wouldn't recommend this spec unless you're doing dungeon leveling and your best weapons are daggers by far, in which case you don't really need riposte. So that's why riposte is not taken, is because I'm going to kind of be assuming you're dungeon leveling if you're going to play combat daggers, because you might as well just play combat swords, combat maces. You can get a high warlord weapon in pre-patch if you're willing to do a little bit of PvP. So pretty much anyone can get a nice weapon if you put in a little time during the pre-patch. So you're always going to have the option to play combat as a spec. Now, up next, I want to look at a very fun spec. This is my personal favorite spec, and it is going to be the one I level with in TBC. And that is a spec that contains Shadow Step, Improved Ambush, and Hemo. Those are kind of the cornerstones of the build. You're looking at it, it's going to look pretty much like a full PvP build, which is part of the appeal. Again, if I were to remove some of the points to see what it looks like right at 60, this is what it's going to look like right at 60. The goal of this build is to play to ambush a target, get it low on health, use Hemo with a weapon swap macro to build a few more combo points, and then eviscerate the mob to death. You're going to be using Shadow Step to jump to mobs quickly and increase the damage of your ambush further, and Improved Eviscerate and the new Dirty Deeds talent is going to increase the damage of your finishing Eviscerate by a lot to make sure the target actually dies pretty quickly after your ambush. So there's a lot of stuff going into your ambush doing more damage. Master of Subtlety, Deadliness, Opportunity, Shadow Step itself, even Sinister Calling. All of these things are going to increase the damage of your ambush by quite a bit. Sinister Calling, only the agility part increases your damage here on the ambush. And so all in all, you're just going to be finding with this playstyle that ambush is going to do between, depending on gear, 40 to 60% of a mob's life. And on caster mobs, I mean, you can almost one-shot the mob. It's not out of the ordinary to ambush a caster mob for anywhere, 80 to, I've even one-shot some mobs. You can 100 to 0 in one ambush with your Shadow Step. And especially if you're really geared, you're going to notice that this build destroys mobs, and it's very fun to play. Now, when it comes to Hemo itself, you might be a little confused. Again, why do we have ambush and Hemo in the same build? Why aren't we using backstab? A big con of pretty much any dagger leveling build is that you have to backstab, you have to Hemo, you have to get behind targets. And that generally means you have to gouge, walk behind the target, stab it. Kidney shot, walk behind the target, stab it. If your gouge or your kidney shot get parried, if they get dodged, if you're unable to get it off. Like, for example, sometimes your kidney will be on cooldown going between mobs because it's a 20-second cooldown. I mean, you're just not going to do any damage. And that's the great thing about Hemo is you can ambush the target, switch weapons with a macro so you don't even have to think about it, and then Hemo the target down using a mace, a claw, or a sword. So I'll have the link to the macro down in the description below. It's going to be 2 macros, one for your ambush, one for your Hemo, and all it does is equip the appropriate weapon right before using the ability. So if you're going to be playing an ambush spec, you're just going to stealth up to the mob, press ambush, it'll equip the dagger. If it's not already equipped, press ambush again, and it'll press the ability. Same thing goes with the Hemo one. You're just going to get used to it, and you're not even going to notice any difference. But I would heavily recommend using the weapon swap macro. Even if it sounds daunting, just check the link in the description, and you'll notice immediately that, wow, this is better than any dagger build I've ever played. I don't have to gouge, run around, stab. It's amazing. So this build is really sick. To finish off the build, I would put 1 point in Relentless Strikes at 61. I would put 5 points into Lethality. I would finish off the points into Deadliness, and then I would put 1 point basically wherever you want. I'd put it maybe something like Improved Gouge. Now, what are the pros and cons of this build? This build is amazing in PvP. It is almost entirely a full PvP spec, and you can make it a full PvP spec by making slight adjustments. There's a couple talents like Master of Subtlety you normally wouldn't take in a normal PvP build that you're going with for more damage quickly. But all in all, and this is another example, Opportunity and Improved Ambush, you wouldn't necessarily take in a full Hemo build that was fully designed for PvP. But it's really going to increase your leveling speed. And you're going to be surprised how fast this build is if you test it when it comes to leveling. And it's decent against elites. It's decent in PvP, or very good in PvP, and it's very fast at killing mobs. The weakness is it does no damage in dungeons. Absolutely nothing here is consistent damage. When it comes to dungeon, you're just going to be mashing Hemo over and over. You don't have improved Slice and Dice. Your auto attack's just going to do so much less damage than a lot of other classes, or other specs rather. You just don't have sustained damage. So much of your damage is coming from ambush that it's just not going to be good if you are doing dungeons. And then another weakness of the build is if you don't get a stealth opener off, this build is going to struggle. Meaning if you're fighting multiple mobs at once, you don't have Blade Flurry. It's going to be weaker. A counter to this is if you have sap and the target is a human, the new buffs to sap, making it so that you never leave stealth when pressing it anymore, and it always lasts a really long time. It can't break early. There's no such thing as an early sap break anymore. And the fact that you can get this dirty tricks talent that reduces the energy cost and increases the range makes sapping a very strong option. So you're really not going to feel any weaker against two enemies because you can sap one, ambush the other, and generally get a re-stealth as long as you keep your distance from the sapped mob. So really the only weaknesses of this build are going to be, again, dungeons and mobs that put debuffs on you that prevent you from re-stealthing or make it hard to get a stealth opener if you don't have Shadow Step up. A counter to that is if you have Shadow Step, you've got a debuff on you. You wait for the debuff to hit you. Let's say it's a 3 second, every 3 seconds it does some damage. You wait for it to hit you, enter stealth, Shadow Step, ambush, and as long as you press those buttons in less than 3 seconds, you are able to get a stealth opener even if you've got a debuff on you like that. But those kind of debuffs can be frustrating. And then also dealing with groups of enemies that are not humanoids is going to be frustrating because you cannot sap them. But besides that, the build is very strong. Now moving past that, we've got, I just wanted to show you, there's another variant of the build you can do that goes into riposte. Now you can't get riposte right at 60, but you are able to go into riposte if you like. I personally would probably just go for the pure damage, but if you're looking to be a little stronger against elites, you can go into riposte. Then you can go into, stuff like malice and improved avis and call it a build. You can also put points into the hit if you like, endurance, improved sprint, whatever you wish. I would recommend taking lightning reflexes though if you do go down this route, because you are going to be able to actually, ignore Sinister Strike because you're able to play Hemo. Now up next, we have got the Mutilate rogue. Now Mutilate is very, very, very fun. The sound is really cool. The Seal Fate procs are fun to play with, and Mutilate has a really cool animation. But it can be a frustrating spec to play while leveling. There's a few reasons. If you read the wording on Mutilate, the damage is increased by 50% against poison targets. This means a few things. Number one, if the target is an elemental and is immune to poison, you are going to have to use Backstab instead of Mutilate, which kind of feels bad because the whole point of playing Mutilate is to press the ability. Likewise, if you get unlucky and you're unable to proc the poison before your CC is ending, so if you've kidney shotted the mob and you're auto attacking him and your just poison's not proccing, you're going to have to backstab because, again, Mutilate relies on the target being poisoned. This also means you can't use instant poison. You're going to need poisons that actually apply a debuff to the target. Now your choices are basically deadly, wound, and crippling, as mind-numbing poison has the lowest proc rate of the four. The problem with deadly poison is it will break your own gouge, it'll break your blind, and is generally frustrating to even just have on the target because it can get you killed because it breaks your own CC. Wound poison is generally going to be the best option because it still does damage on application and applies the debuff. And then you also got crippling, which is a nice effect, but obviously doesn't do any damage. So you're going to have to go for a poison that does less damage than instant, so you're losing some damage there. Again, if the poison doesn't proc, you're going to do less damage. If you're unable to CC the target, so if it's immune to CC, like Elite, it's going to be an absolute nightmare. If your gouge or your kidney are dodged or parried, it's an absolute nightmare. Basically, the spec is super fun and actually kind of decent, except when stuff goes wrong, which unfortunately kind of happens a little too often. I mean, all it takes is your kidney getting parried or dodged, and your kill speed just grinds to a complete halt, unfortunately. So, I mean, with that said, though, it is a really fun spec. You do a ton of damage with Find Weakness and Improved Kidney Shot, you know, combining to make every time you press Kidney a really explosive, you know, window of burst. Spec's decent in PvP because you do a lot of damage, although it does lack tools like Improved Sprint, Prep, Elusiveness. You're going to miss some of those, especially early on. But all in all, very fun spec, but not necessarily the best for leveling. Now, when it comes to dungeons, it's pretty good, but not as good as a combat build with Blade Flurry. When it comes to PvP, again, it's not as good as one of the builds that's going to take Shadow Step, but it's pretty good. And overall, just a fun build, but not necessarily optimal if you're going for pure speed. But that, you know, not everyone's looking for that, right? Now, in terms of build, I would recommend going, you know, down to Mutilate and then over to Improved Ambush. I think Improved Ambush solves some of the problems of the spec. If you open up with an ambush instead of a cheap shot, it gives you a lot more time to apply poison. Whereas if you cheap shot, your first few hits better poison the target, or else you're going to have to cheap shot into backstab, which is kind of lame. So opening with an ambush and then a kidney shot and then finishing the mob with Muta and then a Vis is generally going to be your rotation. But again, you can't actually get Improved Ambush at 60. So starting at 63, the spec gets a lot better. And then as you go further down the tree, you get Elusiveness, which is going to be nice for PvP. But again, you're going to be 67 before you get both points. But if I were to be playing the spec, this is what I would play. Gouge is an ability that you're going to want to press some amount of time. But yeah, going back into the assassination tree to explain some of the choices, I think Ruthlessness is an incredibly good talent for this build because a lot of times you're going to be having 5 combo points, you're going to eviscerate, and if it procs a Ruthlessness combo point, it actually gives you the opportunity to 1 combo point kidney shot, which is the best combo point number for kidney shot. A 1 combo point kidney shot is incredibly powerful because it allows you to get a Mutilate off without actually having to waste a ton of combo points on a finisher that doesn't do any damage. So Ruthlessness is quite good. When it comes to stuff like Master Poisoner and Vile Poisons, I think these are much better in PvP, not necessarily things that are really going to be impactful as much when it comes to PvE. And you could put points in Improved Poisons to increase your chance of applying poisons so you don't have as much frustration with Mutilate. That's certainly an option. But I wanted to go with the, you know, just the most damage. Now, another thing to mention is Mutilate is pretty gear dependent. You need 2 decent daggers. Obviously, you're doing weapon damage with both daggers, so you ideally want both of them to be good, not just one. Whereas previous builds, I mean, if you're playing the other ambush dagger build, your offhand isn't really that important. Whereas this build, it's gonna come into play a little more. And then also, you're gonna need a decent amount of crit to play this build. If you're a fresh 58, fresh 60, again, it's not terrible, but the build is gonna be weaker because if your Mutilates are not critting, they're not really gonna be doing much damage. Now, moving past that, the last spec I'm going to look at, I mean, I'm not actually going to look at it. I just wanted to show that this is kind of what a full PvP spec is going to end up looking like. You're generally going to finish off the build with points like this, and you know, you got a couple different options for how you want to go about rounding out the build. But this is generally what a PvP spec is going to look like, just for, you know, reference. If you wanted to go full Hemo PvP, I wouldn't recommend it. I'd recommend going Improved Ambush, but I just thought I'd show the spec because I'm about to talk about it on this slide. Well, you know, little visual. So in summary, how would I rate each of the specs for the different things that you do while leveling? You know, certain specs have different strengths and weaknesses. Combat is a 10 out of 10 leveling. Nothing is going to be faster than combat. When it comes to dungeons, nothing's going to be better than combat. You get Blade Flurry, you get Adrenaline Rush, great for boss damage. The only spec option that gives you cleave. You've got World PvP at a 1, unfortunately. It's just, that doesn't mean you can't kill anyone. It's just of the specs, it's the worst for World PvP. When it comes to elites, it's the best spec. Adrenaline Rush allows you to burst down elites that some other specs have trouble with. And Gear Reliance is a 1. It doesn't matter what your gear is, you can play combat. Any gear level can play it. It's no big deal. When it comes to combat daggers, I'd say the leveling speed goes down a lot, especially if you're gouging and backstabbing to kill the mobs. When it comes to dungeons, I put them at 9.5. It's basically the same as combat. It's just sometimes when you pull threat, combat can keep doing damage, whereas combat daggers has to like switch targets because you can't backstab a target that's hitting you, stuff like that. When it comes to World PvP, combat daggers has a little more burst, a little stronger against something like a mage that is going to kite you because you're able to spend your energy a little faster. When it comes to elites, combat daggers takes a little bit of a fall from combat. When it comes to gear reliance, they're not super gear reliant either, but a little more reliant than combat. Now, Mutilate. This build, you know, like I said, very fun spec, but it's not really a master at anything. So when it comes to leveling speed, it's not bad. It's going to feel very, very quick and efficient when stuff doesn't go wrong. But like I said, stuff will go wrong. You'll hit elementals that are immune to poison. Your gouges, your kidneys will, you know, get parried and dodged. You're not going to get a stealth opener. All these things are going to slow you down. So it takes it down a decent bit to only being like a 6 out of 10 in terms of speed. When it comes to dungeons, again, you're missing out on Blade Flurry. You're not going to do as much cleave as other classes, but you are going to be doing solid single target damage. When it comes to World PvP, you're pretty decent. You are going to get kited by mages, especially before you get Cloak of Shadows, which is at 66. But you still do quite a lot of damage in stun locks. You're going to have trouble with warriors because you don't have stuff like prep, and you don't have a lot of the talents that help take down warriors, like increased rupture damage, stuff like that. When it comes to elites, absolutely miserable. Mutilate is terrible against elites. You don't have Adrenaline Rush, you don't have prep. You're just terrible. When it comes to Gear Reliance, again, I would put them a 6 out of 10. You need some decent gear to play Mutilate. You want a crit, and you want your daggers to be good for the Mutilate damage. Now we have the Ambush Hemo build. I'd give leveling a 9 out of 10, and I would really, really recommend giving it a go. If you don't believe in the Ambush Hemo damage, I'll put some links in the description below to some of my videos that I've had background footage just playing Ambush Hemo, and you're going to see like, wait, what? Ambush is like almost one-shotting caster mobs, and I mean, regularly doing quite a bit of damage. Even into the higher levels now, I am still ambushing targets that have no mana, normal warrior brute ogre dudes, for like 60% of their health in only AQ gear. And if you have Nax gear, it's even better. Again, Gear Reliance. As you get more gear, it's better. Without gear, it's a little bit weaker. Continuing on, in dungeons, like I said, it's weak. You just don't have a lot going on that even does anything in a dungeon. World PvP, I'd put a 9.5. I mean, there's a couple talents different from a full PvP spec, but for all intents and purposes, it's like almost a full PvP spec, and it's going to do great in PvP. And these are all ratings out of 10, obviously, in case I didn't say that. But yeah, when it comes to elites, I'd say the spec is about an 8 out of 10. You have prep, which means 2 evasions, 2 sprints, and that's going to be really helpful. But ultimately, there's going to be some elites that are immune to CC, and Adrenaline Rush really does help burst them down. Just doing more overall damage is helpful. So combat is going to be a little better against the harder elites in my experience, but it all depends, right? Against elites where sprint is good, like, I mean, a preparation could be more valuable than potentially a combat spec. Lastly, Hemo PvP. I just put this as like a 4 scale to just show how just a few talents from Ambush Hemo drastically change the strength of a spec. And I mean, it makes sense. If Ambush is doing like 2/3 of a mob's health and you're playing a spec that doesn't have Ambush but is still deep in subtlety, it's going to make sense you do like way less damage. So that's just for reference. all in all, I'd recommend if you've got really good daggers, I'd recommend going for like an ambush hemo build and playing Mutilate if you want for fun, but just keep in mind it's not going to be necessarily the fastest. If you just want to go, 60 to 70 as fast as humanly possible, and you want to be getting into those dungeon groups, combat is going to be your best bet. But yeah, let me know what you guys think. I know personally I'm going to be playing the ambush hemo spec because it's important for me to be strong in PvP, and I also have good daggers to use for the build, and I know that even though I am sacrificing some dungeon damage, I know it's more important to me to have fun world PvPing while leveling than it would be to do, top damage in a dungeon. So that's my plan. Let me know what you guys think. What spec are you guys going to go with? And thanks for watching.